Commander Zix-9 of the Galactic Enforcement Division stared at the sensor readings with 4 eyes that had seen too much. The numbers made no sense. Absolutely none. Run the scan again, he growled through his mandibles, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years spent hunting the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. Sir, we have run it 12 times. The readings are consistent. Lieutenant Kelfor's voice trembled slightly. The young officer had never seen anything like this either. Zix-9's claws tapped against the metal console in a rhythm that spoke of barely contained anxiety. The ship they were tracking should not exist, could not exist, yet here it was, moving through space like a ghost made of nightmares and impossibility. Tell me again what happened to the research station, he said, though he already knew every horrific detail. Station Omega-7 went dark 6 hours ago. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, just silence. Kelfor's throat sac pulsed nervously. When the rescue team arrived, they found 17 dead. All of them experienced soldiers. All of them killed by what appears to be a single individual. Security footage. Destroyed. But sir, Kelfor hesitated. The survivors, the ones who were off duty in the lower levels, they all say the same thing. They saw a figure, humanoid, moving through the station like it owned the place. Zix-9's blood turned cold. He knew that description. Every enforcement officer in the galaxy had been briefed on it. The phantom, the ghost, the thing that should have been dead 20 years ago. And you are certain it's the same ship from the original incident. The energy signature is identical, down to the last decimal point. Kelfor's voice dropped to a whisper. Sir, that's impossible. The ship was destroyed. We all saw the footage. Apparently, Zix-9 muttered, we saw what someone wanted us to see. The bridge fell silent, except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled past in their eternal dance, indifferent to the drama unfolding in this small corner of the galaxy. Zix-9 remembered the first time he'd heard the story. A young officer then, fresh out of the academy, he'd listened with the kind of skepticism that only comes from inexperience. A human child, barely 8 years old, taken from a research facility during a routine raid, the kind of thing that happened all the time in the Outer Rim territories. Nothing special about it, except everything about it had been special. The boy's parents had been scientists, brilliant ones, working on classified projects that made the Galactic Council nervous. When pirates hit their facility, the plan had been simple: take the valuable research, eliminate the witnesses, disappear into the void. But plans have a way of going wrong when humans are involved. Sir, Kelfor interrupted his thoughts. We are receiving a transmission. From who? Unknown sender. Audio only. It's coming from the target ship. Zix-9's 4 hearts skipped a beat. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled to life, and a voice filled the air. Human, male, speaking in perfect galactic standard with an accent that belonged to no world Zix-9 could identify. Commander Zix-9 of the Enforcement Division. I know you are listening. The voice was calm, too calm, like someone discussing the weather, rather than addressing the officer hunting them across the galaxy. I want you to know that I remember you. Oh yes, I remember all of you, every single one of you who was there that day. Zix-9's mandibles clicked involuntarily. He had been there, part of the response team that arrived too late to save the research station, too late to save the boy's parents, too late to prevent what came next. You see, Commander, you made a mistake 20 years ago. You assumed that taking an 8-year-old human child would be simple, clean, efficient. The voice paused, and in that silence, Zix-9 could hear something that made his skin crawl. Amusement. You were wrong. The transmission cut out. Sir, the ship is changing course, Kelfor reported, his voice tight with fear. It's heading directly for us. Zix-9 stared at the tactical display, watching the blip that represented their nightmare approach with steady, inexorable purpose. The ship was small, a single-person fighter by the looks of it. Against his battle cruiser, it should have been nothing more than an annoyance. Should have been. Raise shields, charge weapons, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we have found him. Sir, what do we tell them about the target? 6-9's laugh was bitter. Tell them the ghost is real. Tell them the boy we took 20 years ago is coming home. But even as he gave the orders, 6-9 knew they were already too late. They'd been too late from the moment they'd decided to take a human child from his parent. Too late from the moment they'd underestimated what grief and rage could do to a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of the food chain. The boy they'd taken had been small, weak, helpless. The thing coming for them now was none of those things. Sir, we are being scanned, Kelfor reported. But the readings are unusual. Unusual how? The scan is learning our systems, mapping our defenses. It's not just looking at us, sir. It's studying us. 6-9 felt his blood turn to ice. How long until it reaches us? At current speed, 14 minutes. 14 minutes. 14 minutes. To prepare for something that had haunted the nightmares of every enforcement officer for 2 decades. 14 minutes to ready themselves for a confrontation with a legend that walked among the stars. All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill. The alarm klaxons wailed through the ship, and 6-9 watched his crew scramble to their positions. Good soldiers, all of them, experienced, well-trained. They'd faced pirates, rebels, and worse. But they'd never faced this. The tactical display showed the approaching ship with clinical precision. Distance, speed, projected intercept course. All the numbers that made warfare feel manageable, controllable. None of them mentioned the cargo of rage and vengeance that ship carried. Commander, Kelfor said quietly, the stories about what happened after we took him, are they true? 6-9 didn't answer immediately. The stories were classified, buried in files that required clearance levels most officers would never see. But everyone had heard the whispers, the rumors, the legends that grew in the dark corners of military bases and enforcement stations. A human child, taken from his parents, sold to researchers who specialized in studying alien psychology, subjected to experiments that would have broken the minds of hardened soldiers, pushed beyond every limit of endurance and sanity. And then, one day, he'd stopped screaming. The stories, 6-9 said finally, don't tell half of it. Sir, we are receiving another transmission. Audio or visual? Visual this time, sir. 6-9's throat went dry. Put it through. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the approaching ship. And there, seated in the pilot's chair, was their nightmare made flesh. The face was human, but wrong. Not scarred or mutilated, but somehow absent, as if the features had been carefully arranged by someone who'd only heard faces described, but never seen one. The eyes were the worst part. They held intelligence, yes, but also something else. Something that made 6-9's primitive hindbrain scream warnings about predators and apex hunters. Hello, Commander, the figure said, and its voice was exactly as calm as before. I thought you might like to see what your colleagues made of me. You are under arrest for the murder of 17 enforcement officers, 6-9 managed to say, though his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. The thing that had once been a boy smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Oh, Commander, you still don't understand, do you? I'm not here to be arrested. I'm here to collect a debt. What debt? The debt you owe for taking a child from his parents. The debt you owe for selling him to monsters who wore the faces of scientists. The debt you owe for 20 years of experiments that turned a frightened boy into something that can walk through your nightmares and make them real. The figure leaned forward, and 6-9 could see that where its nose should have been, there was only smooth skin. Where its mouth was, the lips moved in patterns that didn't quite match the words coming through the speakers. But don't worry, Commander, I'm not unreasonable. I'm going to give you the same chance you gave me all those years ago. What chance? The chance to run. The transmission cut out. Sir, the ship has stopped, Kelfor reported. It's just sitting there, 300 kilometers out. 6-9 stared at the tactical display, trying to understand what game was being played. The enemy ship was well within weapons range. Why stop? Why give them time to prepare? Unless scan for other ships. Full spectrum. Look for anything that might be hiding. Sir, scans are negative. There's only the one ship. Then why isn't it attacking? The answer came not from his instruments but from the ship's internal sensors. Alarms began blaring throughout the vessel, and Kelfor's face went pale. Sir, we have an intruder. Deck 7. Security team is responding. How? How did someone get aboard? I don't know, sir. The shields are still up. No ships have docked. But someone is definitely aboard. Zix-9's blood ran cold. Pull up the security feeds. Deck 7. The screen showed a corridor that should have been empty. Was empty, according to the sensors. But the security team was firing at something. Their energy weapons discharged in coordinated patterns, targeting an enemy that the cameras couldn't see. Sir, came a voice over the comm, tight with panic. Whatever it is, our weapons aren't stopping it. It's moving toward the engine room. All security teams converge on Deck 7. Authorization code, Delta 7. Use lethal force. But even as he gave the orders, Zix-9 knew they were useless. The thing moving through his ship wasn't something that could be stopped by conventional weapons. It was something that had been forged in laboratories and shaped by pain into a weapon more terrible than any device of war. Commander, Kelfor whispered, what do we do? Zix-9 looked at his young officer and saw his own terror reflected in the boy's eyes. 20 years of nightmares, and now the nightmare had come for them all. We pray, he said quietly. We pray that what we are about to face can still remember what it means to be human. But deep in his heart, Zix-9 knew that prayer would go unanswered. The thing stalking through his ship had been human once, had been a child once, had been innocent once. That time was long past. The lights flickered, and somewhere in the depths of the ship, something that had once been a boy named Marcus Hunt continued its inexorable advance toward the bridge, toward justice, toward a reckoning, 20 years in the making. And Commander Zix-9, veteran of 100 battles, sat in his command chair and waited for the ghost to finally come home. The bridge doors exploded inward with a sound like thunder, not from weapons fire, but from something far more primitive, something that had simply pushed through reinforced metal as if it were paper. Commander Zix-9 spun in his chair, weapon drawn, and came face to face with 20 years of nightmares made flesh. Marcus Hunt stood in the doorway, and up close the wrongness of him was even more apparent. His movements were too fluid, too precise, like a predator that had learned to walk upright but hadn't quite mastered the illusion of being prey. Hello, Commander, Marcus said, his voice carrying that same unnatural calm. Thank you for waiting. Security teams report. Zix-9 barked into his comm, but only static answered. The silence stretched like a held breath. Oh, they are alive, Marcus said, as if reading his thoughts. Most of them. I try not to kill unnecessarily these days. It's inefficient. The casual way he said it made Zix-9's skin crawl. This wasn't the rage-fueled revenge he'd expected. This was something far worse. Something calculated. You want to know what they did to me? Marcus continued, stepping onto the bridge with movements that seemed to flow like water. After you sold me to Dr. Vex Prime and his research team, Lieutenant Kelfor whimpered at the mention of that name. Every enforcement officer knew the story. Vex Prime, the scientist who specialized in breaking minds and rebuilding them, the one who disappeared into the black sites 20 years ago. I was 8 years old, Marcus said, his head tilting at an angle that was just wrong enough to make everyone on the bridge uncomfortable. Do you know what it's like to be 8 years old and have your entire concept of reality systematically dismantled? We were following orders, Zix-9 said, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Oh, I know. Everyone was just following orders. The pirates who killed my parents, the officers who sold me, the scientists who improved me. Marcus smiled, and the expression was worse than any scream. But you see, Commander, I learned something interesting during my time with Dr. Vex Prime. Orders are just suggestions. Reality is just a starting point. He gestured, and the bridge's main display flickered to life. But instead of showing tactical information, it showed a recording. A laboratory. A small human child strapped to a table, screaming. "Turn it off," 6-9 growled. "Why? This is what you paid for. This is what your credits purchased." Marcus's voice never changed tone, never showed emotion. "Watch, Commander. Watch what you bought." The recording played on, showing things that made hardened soldiers look away. Experiments that pushed the boundaries of what any sentient being could endure. And through it all, a little boy's screams echoing through sterile corridors. Day after day, Marcus narrated, his voice a counterpoint to the horror on screen. Month after month, year after year. Do you know what the human mind does when it's pushed beyond every limit, when it's forced to adapt or die? The recording shifted, showing the same laboratory years later. The child was older now, maybe 12, but he wasn't screaming anymore. He was watching, learning, adapting. It evolves, Marcus said simply. It becomes something new, something that can survive in any environment, even yours. "What do you want?" 6-9 asked, though he already knew the answer. "Justice, Commander. The same justice you gave to an 8-year-old boy who never hurt anyone." Marcus moved closer, and 6-9 noticed that his feet made no sound on the metal deck. "But I'm not unreasonable. I'm going to offer you the same choice you offered me." "What choice?" "You can submit to experimentation. Voluntary, of course. I will study you, learn how your mind works, push you to your breaking point and beyond. Just like Dr. Vex Prime did to me." Marcus's smile widened. "Or you can refuse, and I will simply end this quickly." The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. 6-9 looked at his officers, saw the terror in their eyes, and made a decision that would haunt him for however long he had left to live. "I choose neither," he said, raising his weapon. "I choose to fight." Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. And the sound was like breaking glass. "Oh, Commander, you still don't understand what you are dealing with, do you?" The weapon in 6-9's hand simply stopped working. Not jammed, not damaged, just stopped, as if the very concept of function had been removed from it. "You see," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket, "Dr. Vex Prime taught me many things. How to endure pain, how to adapt to any environment, how to survive in situations that would kill ordinary beings." He pulled out a small device, something that looked like a toy, but hummed with barely contained energy. "But most importantly, he taught me how to learn, how to improve, how to become something better than what I was." The device in his hand projected a holographic display, showing the interior of the ship in perfect detail, every corridor, every room, every hiding place marked with surgical precision. "I have been studying your ship, Commander, learning its weaknesses, understanding how it thinks, and now I know exactly how to break it." He touched the device, and the ship's lights flickered. Then the artificial gravity wavered. Then the life support systems began to stutter. "Stop," 6-9 said, his voice tight with panic. "You will kill us all." "Oh no, Commander, I'm much more precise than that. I'm going to keep you alive, all of you, because dead beings can't suffer, and suffering is what you owe me." The bridge crew watched in horror as their instruments began to fail, one by one, not damaged, but somehow convinced that they shouldn't work, as if reality itself was being rewritten around them. "You want to know the real joke?" Marcus asked, his voice conversational despite the chaos erupting around them. "I wasn't even supposed to be the subject. Dr. Vex Prime was hired to study human psychology, yes, but the real experiment was to see how far he could push a human mind before it broke." He gestured to the failing systems around them. "Congratulations, Commander, you succeeded. You broke me completely, and then I rebuilt myself into something that could break you back." "This is insane," Kel 4 whispered. "Insane?" Marcus turned to the young officer, and his expression was almost kind. "No, Lieutenant. Insane implies irrationality. What I'm doing is perfectly rational. I'm collecting a debt. With interest." The main display flickered again, this time showing the ship's external sensors. But instead of empty space, they showed other ships. Dozens of them, all identical to the one Marcus had arrived in. "You see, Commander, I wasn't the only child taker. Over the years, Dr. Vex Prime and his colleagues acquired quite a collection, and we have all been very busy learning, growing, improving." Zix-9 felt his blood turn to ice. How many? 43 survivors from the original programs. Each one adapted differently. Each one specialized in different aspects of improvement. Marcus's smile was terrible. "Would you like to meet them?" The bridge filled with new voices. Human voices. But wrong. Like Marcus's, as if they'd learned to speak by listening to recordings rather than living among others. "Hello, Commander," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We have been waiting to meet you." "Waiting so very long," added another. "Planning so very carefully," came a third. Zix-9 looked around the bridge, but saw only his crew. The voices belonged to phantoms, to ghosts that existed in the spaces between what was real and what was possible. "You are not here," he said, though his voice shook. "You are not really here." "Oh, but we are, Commander," Marcus said gently. "We are here in every system you depend on, every circuit you trust, every decision your computers make. We have been learning your technology, understanding it, becoming part of it." The ship's AI spoke, but its voice was wrong. Human, young, hurt. "Commander Zix-9, it said in the voice of a child, "you have been found guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentence is adaptation." "What does that mean?" Zix-9 asked, though he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "It means, Commander, that you are going to learn what it feels like to be taken from everything you know and love, to be studied, to be improved, to be broken down and rebuilt into something that serves a purpose you never chose." The bridge began to change around them. Not physically, but somehow, as if the very concept of what a bridge should be was being rewritten in real time. "You are going to become part of our crew, Commander. All of you. You are going to help us collect the rest of our debts. Starting with the politicians who authorized the programs, the scientists who designed them, the officers who carried them out. And then," Zix-9 asked, "Then, Commander, we are going to show the galaxy what happens when you take children from species that don't forgive, don't forget, don't stop hunting until justice is served." The transformation was complete now. The bridge looked the same, but felt different. Alien, as if it had been designed by minds that understood function but not form, purpose but not beauty. "Welcome to the crew, Commander," Marcus said, his voice fading as his form began to dissolve. "Try not to fight the integration process. It's much more painful if you resist." Zix-9 felt something touch his mind, not invasive, but insistent, like a gentle hand guiding him toward understanding, toward toward a new way of being that would let him serve a purpose he'd never chosen but couldn't refuse. "The children you took," he managed to say as the change began, "they are gone, aren't they? The innocent ones, the ones who just wanted to go home." "Oh no, Commander," Marcus replied, his voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "We are still here. Still that 8-year-old boy who missed his parents. Still that frightened child who just wanted the pain to stop." The ship began to move, turning toward its next destination, toward the next name on a list that had been 20 years in the making. "But now we know something that child didn't," Marcus continued. "We know that some kinds of pain can only be stopped by sharing them, and we have so much pain to share." Commander Zix-9 tried to scream as the integration process completed, but found he no longer had a voice of his own. He was part of something larger now, something that had been forged in laboratories and shaped by suffering into a weapon more terrible than any navy. Somewhere in the depths of the ship, in a place that existed between reality and possibility, 43 children who had been taken from their families continued their work, planning, learning, growing. And across the galaxy, in government offices and research facilities, in military bases and corporate boardrooms, the beings who had authorized their creation began to have nightmares, dreams of children with faces that weren't quite right, and voices that spoke of debts 20 years overdue. The ghost ship moved through space, carrying its cargo of justice and vengeance toward destinations that had been marked on star charts written in pain and memory. And in the captain's chair, something that had once been Commander Zix-9 sat perfectly still, watching the stars wheel past, and understanding, finally, what it meant to be taken from everything you knew and loved. The children were coming home, and they were bringing friends. 3 days later, the Galactic Council received a transmission that would change everything. It came from Senator Grex II, one of the most powerful politicians in the Outer Rim territories. The transmission was brief, terrifying, and absolutely impossible to ignore. "They took my grandson," the senator's voice cracked through the speakers, "just like we took theirs. But they gave him back, changed, improved. He looks at me now with eyes that aren't his own and speaks in voices I don't recognize." The council chamber fell silent. 200 of the galaxy's most powerful beings sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. "He tells me things," Senator Grex II continued, his voice breaking, "about the programs, about the children, about what we authorized, and then he asks me questions, such terrible questions, about pain, about justice, about what it feels like to watch your family disappear." The transmission ended with a sound that would haunt the council members for the rest of their lives. Not screaming, not crying, just a child's voice, speaking with perfect calm about debts that could never be repaid. Within hours, similar reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Children of politicians, scientists, military officers, all returned safely to their families, all changed in ways that made their parents weep. But the real terror came from what the children brought with them: knowledge, detailed files about classified programs, names, dates, locations, everything needed to prosecute war crimes that had been buried in black sites for decades. "They are not seeking revenge," whispered Council Member Hex Prime during an emergency session. "They are building a case, a legal case. They want trials." "Trials?" another member scoffed. "For what?" "Following orders. Maintaining galactic security." The answer came from an unexpected source. The chamber's main display activated, showing a courtroom that shouldn't exist. A perfect recreation of the Galactic Court of Justice, but somehow wrong. The judges were human children, their faces bearing that same terrible wrongness that marked all the survivors. "Citizens of the galaxy," spoke the child who sat in the Chief Justice's chair. Her voice carried the weight of authority that came from suffering beyond measure. "You are hereby summoned to answer for crimes against humanity. The charges are as follows." The list that followed was comprehensive, systematic, damning. Every black site program, every unauthorized experiment, every child taken from their families and sold to monsters wearing lab coats. "We have evidence," the child continued, her voice never wavering. "We have testimony. We have the memories of every victim, preserved in perfect detail. And we have something else." The display shifted, showing the interior of research facilities across the galaxy. But these weren't archives or recordings. These were live feeds, current operations, scientists working on new subjects, unaware that their every move was being watched and catalogued. "We have the power to stop it," the child said simply. "All of it. Every program, every facility, every monster who hides behind the excuse of scientific progress." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in chaos. Representatives shouted at each other, blamed each other, demanded explanations that no one could provide. But in the depths of space, 43 children who had been taken from their families continued their work. They'd moved beyond simple revenge, beyond even justice. They were reshaping the galaxy itself, one system at a time, and in a small cabin aboard their flagship, Marcus Hunt sat across from Commander Zix-9, who now wore the face of his former self, but spoke with the voice of collective purpose. "Do you understand now, Commander?" Marcus asked gently. "Why we couldn't simply kill you? Why we had to show you what we have become?" Zix-9 nodded slowly. His integration was complete now, but his memories remained intact. The horror of what he'd participated in, the casual cruelty of treating children as commodities, the bureaucratic evil of following orders without question. "You needed witnesses," Zix-9 said, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. "People who could testify to what the programs really were, what they really did, exactly. And now you will help us reach the others. The ones who authorized the experiments, the ones who profited from them, the ones who looked the other way while children screamed in laboratories." The ship shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, they could see their destination, the capital world of the Galactic Council, home to billions of beings who had no idea that their comfortable lives had been built on the suffering of innocence. "They won't surrender," Zix-9 observed. "They will fight, send fleets, declare war, if necessary." Marcus smiled, and for just a moment, he looked like the 8-year-old boy he'd once been. "Let them try, Commander. Let them send their fleets and their armies. Let them discover what happens when you declare war on beings who were forged in the fires of scientific curiosity and tempered by decades of systematic torture." The ship's communication system activated, broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. "Citizens of the galaxy," Marcus spoke, his voice carrying to every world, every station, every ship within 100 light years. "My name is Marcus Hunt. I was 8 years old when your government took me from my parents. I was sold to scientists who spent 20 years teaching me about pain, about adaptation, about survival." The broadcast continued, reaching billions of beings who had never heard of the black site programs, never known about the children taken from their families, never understood the price of their security. "Today, I return that lesson to you. Today, you learn what it means to be subject to forces beyond your control. Today, you discover what happens when the victims of your crimes come home." The transmission ended, and across the galaxy, beings who had lived their entire lives in safety began to understand fear. Not the fear of war or disaster, but something far more primal. The fear of consequences, of debts coming due, of children who had been taken and returned as something else entirely. In the end, the galaxy would learn what humanity had always known, that some species, when pushed beyond their breaking point, don't break. They evolve, and evolution, unlike justice, is never satisfied with just one generation. It keeps going, keeps adapting, keeps becoming something new, something that can survive in any environment, even one built on the systematic torture of children. The children were coming home, and they were bringing the future with them. The first strike came not from weapons or armies, but from something far more devastating: information. Every classified file, every buried report, every secret communication between the council members and their black site operators flooded the galactic networks simultaneously. Citizens across 1,000 worlds woke to find their personal communication devices displaying horrific images. Children in laboratory settings, detailed surgical procedures, progress reports written in clinical language that described suffering with the detached precision of accountants tallying expenses. Project Mindbreak, Subject 127, read one report that appeared on every public screen in the galaxy. Human male, age 9, responded well to psychological conditioning. Recommend increasing pain threshold testing to determine upper limits of consciousness retention. The riots started within hours. On the industrial world of Kepler-9, factory workers stormed the government buildings after learning their tax credits had funded child torture programs. On the resort moon of Vega 7, Wealthy tourists found themselves face to face with holograms of the children their vacation funds had helped disappear. But the real chaos came from the military. Admiral Thex Prime of the Fifth Fleet received a visit from his own daughter, the same daughter who had been kidnapped by pirates 6 months ago, the same daughter he'd mourned, the same daughter who now stood in his command center with eyes that held too much knowledge and a voice that spoke of terrible things. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made his bridge crew whimper. "I have learned so much while I was away. Would you like me to show you?" The Admiral's flagship, the pride of the Fifth Fleet, simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed, just convinced somehow that its purpose had changed, that its weapons were meant to target different enemies, that its loyalty belonged to different masters. "You see, Father," his daughter continued, walking through the bridge as if she owned it. "The scientists who improved me taught me about systems, about how they work, about how they can be repurposed." The Admiral watched in horror as his crew began to move differently, not controlled, but somehow persuaded, as if their understanding of duty and loyalty had been gently adjusted to serve a new purpose. "What do you want?" he whispered. "The same thing you wanted when you authorized the programs, Father. Security, safety, a galaxy where children can grow up without fear." She smiled, and the expression was both heartbreaking and terrifying. "The only difference is, I know how to actually achieve it." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Military commanders found their fleets turning against them. Politicians discovered their own security forces following new orders. Corporate executives learned that their manufacturing facilities were now producing something entirely different than what they'd been designed for. But the most terrifying moment came when the Galactic Council itself convened for an emergency session. The chamber filled with the most powerful beings in known space, all demanding answers, all seeking someone to blame. They found both. The chamber's main door opened, and 43 figures walked in. Not the broken, traumatized children who had been taken decades ago, but something new, something that had been forged in laboratories and shaped by suffering into instruments of perfect justice. Marcus Hunt led them, his face bearing that same terrible wrongness that marked all the survivors. Behind him came the others. Some looked human, others had been changed more dramatically by their experiences. All of them moved with the fluid precision of apex predators. "Honored council members," Marcus said, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber without amplification. "Thank you for gathering. It saves us considerable time." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted orders to security forces that no longer responded. Politicians demanded explanations from advisors who had disappeared. Military leaders called for reinforcements that would never come. Through it all, the 43 survivors stood perfectly still, waiting for the noise to die down. "You are wondering how we got here," Marcus continued when the shouting finally subsided. "How we bypassed your security, how we disabled your defenses, how we convinced your own people to let us walk in." He gestured to the chamber around them, and the council members realized with growing horror that their own security forces were present, standing at attention, waiting for orders that would come from entirely different sources. "The answer is simple," Marcus said. "We asked them to choose them, their families, their children, all the beings whose lives you have treated as acceptable losses in your pursuit of security." One of the council members, a massive creature from the Andromeda sector, rose from his seat. "You are terrorists, criminals. We will hunt you to the ends of the galaxy." Marcus turned to face him, and his expression was almost pitying. "Council of X8, you authorized 17 separate programs, 437 children taken from their families, sold to researchers who specialized in psychological conditioning." The councilor's face went pale. "Those programs were necessary for galactic security, for the greater good, for the greater good," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine amusement. "How many times have you used that phrase to justify the unjustifiable, Counselor? How many children's screams have you dismissed with those 3 words? The chamber filled with new voices, human voices. But these weren't the survivors speaking. These were the voices of the children who had been taken, the ones who had died in the laboratories, the ones who had been broken beyond repair. We remember. The voices whispered from every speaker, every communication device, every piece of technology in the chamber. We remember the promises, the justifications, the greater good that required our suffering. Councillor Vexate tried to speak but found his voice had been taken, not by force, but by something far more subtle. The simple understanding that he had forfeited his right to speak when he had authorized the silencing of so many others. You are wondering what we want, Marcus continued, addressing the entire chamber. Revenge? Justice? The destruction of everything you have built. He paused, letting the question hang in the air like a blade. We want what you stole from us. Childhood, innocence, the right to grow up without fear. And since you can't give that back, we will take the next best thing. The chamber's displays activated, showing every world, every system, every corner of the galaxy where the survivors' influence had spread. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't destruction. It was something far more profound. We are going to rebuild it, Marcus said simply. All of it. Every system, every government, every institution that thought children were acceptable casualties in the pursuit of power. The displays showed the scope of their work. Entire fleets converted to new purposes. Governments restructured around principles of protection rather than profit. Research facilities repurposed to heal rather than harm. You created us, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You took frightened children and forged them into something that could survive in any environment, even yours. He gestured to his fellow survivors, and for just a moment, they looked like what they truly were. Children who had been taken from their families and subjected to horrors beyond imagination. Children who had endured, adapted, evolved. Thank you, Marcus said, his voice carrying genuine gratitude, for teaching us that the only way to ensure something like this never happens again is to make sure people like you never have the power to authorize it. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a conquest. It wasn't even revenge. It was succession. The old order was ending, and something new was beginning. Something that had been forged in the fires of scientific curiosity and tempered by decades of systematic torture. Something that understood pain, adaptation, and survival in ways that no natural-born being ever could. The children were coming home, and were bringing the future with them. A future where no child would ever again wake up in a laboratory, wondering why the adults who were supposed to protect them had decided their suffering was acceptable. In the end, the galaxy would learn what humanity had always known, that some species, when pushed beyond their breaking point, don't break. They evolve, and evolution, unlike justice, is never satisfied with just one generation. It keeps going, keeps adapting, keeps becoming something new. Something that can survive in any environment, even one built on the systematic torture of children. The age of the Galactic Council was over. The age of the survivors had begun, and in the depths of space, on worlds that had never known war, children slept safely in their beds, protected by guardians who understood, better than anyone, the true cost of innocence lost.